What's up guys, MKBHD here, and this is iPhone 10, and it's my favorite iPhone ever by far. And there's no doubt that in the history of iPhones, this thing is iconic. It's more modern, it finally feels like a new iPhone. That's a big part of why I like it so much, but that's also the source for a few sore spots. There's a learning curve to this phone, unlike any other iPhone. You see, every other iPhone ever has just been home button, rectangle, screen, rounded corners, pretty much the same thing. You know what you're getting yourself into, you know exactly how to use it, and if there's maybe one big new feature every year, it takes you 2 seconds to learn it and you're good. iPhone 10 is different. With this phone, there's maybe 3 or 4 big fundamental changes to the way you use the phone. Now, it's very clearly still an iPhone. You still mostly know how to use it, but there's a couple things that are different that you'll have to get used to. So on the outside, it's the shape we're used to, the rectangle with rounded corners, but this is the first time the display itself actually has curved corners, and it's pushed right up to the edges of the phone, or at least closer than they've ever been. The commercials make it seem a little more dramatic than it actually is, but hey, it's 2017, phones have small bezels, that's just the way they are now, so in that way, the iPhone catches up. And it pushes everything to the corners and keeps all the front-facing sensors in the notch, that forsaken notch at the top. It's actually not that big of a deal, but we'll get into that soon. Just holding the phone though, it feels great. I think it's an awesome size, but if there were a bigger iPhone 10 Plus, I would totally get that. Right now, despite the larger display, the 10 is definitely closer to feeling like an iPhone 8 than an 8 Plus. It still feels like a smaller phone compared to the others I've used. And also, thanks to the stainless steel sides, it's definitely slippery and it's definitely going to slide out of your pocket at least once. It happens to the best of them. And it's crazy, the silver, it's so shiny. And honestly, we all know your phone is never going to look as good as it does fresh out the box. Unlike the more matte finish of the previous iPhone, I'm not convinced this super shiny finish on the iPhone's rails is going to last like this. We've seen this before on other products. It definitely gets chipped and scratched. You probably already know I usually go for a matte black skin here, which, not gonna lie, still looks pretty good. But Dbrand's got something new for the 10, the grip. So like the name implies, this thing is supposed to be the best way to grip your phone. Look for a full review of this bumper later this month, but I'll leave a link below if you want to check this one out. A lot of people were asking about it when I showed it in my Instagram story. But overall, it's a pretty complete hardware package as you'd expect from a $1,000 smartphone. You know, it's the speakers, even though they aren't front-facing, are still pretty good. It's water resistant, which gives you some nice peace of mind. It has wireless charging. There's no headphone jack. Welcome to 2017. But overall, it's well considered and well put together. Is it now officially the most breakable iPhone ever thanks to having glass on the back? Yes. Yes. The one part of the hardware of this phone I actually really don't like is the camera bump, but not just for the usual reason, like rocking on a table. I've just kind of accepted that at this point. But because of the new orientation, a couple times I've noticed it's easy to accidentally get your finger in the photo or video you're taking, just because it's all up in the corner. It might take a couple days to get used to that and stop getting your finger in the corner of your shots. But what's really become the signature feature of the iPhone 10 is around the front, and it is that notch up at the top of the display. And there are 2 camps with this. Number 1 is, I hate it, it's ugly, I wish it wasn't there. And number 2 is, I actually don't notice it anymore. And just like with the Essential phone, I tend to fall more in camp number 2. When you want to make a 2017 phone and you want to shrink the bezels, you still have to put all the front-facing sensors, all of the cameras, and the IR blaster and the depth sensor, you have to put that somewhere. In 2017, some manufacturers keep a smaller traditional bezel to house it. Some try to go no top bezel and put everything in the chin. Some try to minimize all the bezels and use a sort of a cutout notch. Apple has decided to go with a notch. And I don't mind it. In fact, I literally don't even think about it anymore in everyday use. Now, obviously, when you're focusing on it here as I'm talking about it and highlighting it on video, it's really obvious. You know, the unibrow at the top, it kind of just becomes a part of this iPhone 10's character, but you're never really looking at it during normal use. Like flipping through apps, scrolling through Twitter, Instagram, whatever, it disappears pretty quick. Now, not everybody feels this way, clearly. Like, I've seen all the clever, like hiding the notch stuff, all the apps and the wallpapers and that. I get that. But because this is Apple and because they're stubborn and will never admit that any of their solutions are anything other than perfect, they've come up with the opposite solution, which is embrace the notch. So in all their software and all the software they'll promote is apps that wrap right around that notch and fill up the whole display. That's what an optimized iPhone 10 app looks like. And since this is a taller aspect ratio, apps will have to get updated to do this. Developers will have to get on their horse and actually put in the work and update their apps to get them to fill up the display like this. And to be fair, most of the big name apps are already upgrading and embracing the notch like Apple wants, but there are still plenty that haven't updated yet, and they'll be obvious when you see them because they'll have these big bezels up at the top and the bottom, kind of like you're using them on an iPhone 8 again. So slowly, over the next couple of weeks and months, all of the apps you're using will get updated to embrace that notch, whether you like it or not. It just takes some time. Probably the biggest change developers have had to make to their apps for a new iPhone since the beginning. So for the record, the only time I really think about that notch is when I'm watching videos. Yes, it gets kind of awkward here because when you're watching videos full screen, the notch will cut off some of the display, some of what you're trying to watch. So if you want to avoid that, you can actually double tap and it'll bring in the video you're watching on this OLED display. Now you have some more bezels. But at this point, now the video you're watching is so small you might as well not be watching it on a bigger screen. It feels like the same size as the iPhone 8. So this whole thing is the main reason why I would actually want a plus-sized iPhone 10. Anyway, as for the rest of the display, it's great. Apple calls it a Super Retina display. I just call it their first OLED in a smartphone ever, finally. And it's pretty awesome. It's a 5.8-inch panel, high pixel density. It supports the P3 color gamut, HDR, it has True Tone. It doesn't get as bright and saturated as Samsung's like Note 8 and S8 displays, but it is still bright enough, not too cartoonish with the colors. Has a small blue shift when you tilt it off axis, but so do many other OLEDs to varying degrees. And it still has 3D touch, although I pretty much stopped using that completely except for lock screen controls that I wish I could change. So the screen is awesome, and it's a big part of why this phone looks so good from so many angles. So good job, Samsung. Now, of course, when you go to a full screen display like this, you lose the home button. So that's why iPhone 10 replaces that home button with a whole bunch of gestures. This is the biggest learning curve of any iPhone ever, but it's still not that bad. You swipe up from that bar at the bottom of the screen at any time to go home now. Anytime you see that bar, it represents the home, and whatever app you're in will close itself just like any other iPhone hitting the home button. Swipe down from the top for notifications, but now swipe from the right corner for your control center. And then for multitasking, again, you have no home button, so you swipe halfway up and then over to get through your recent apps. That'll get you to that same card-style carousel as before. But overall, once you get a hang of this system, once you get used to all this swiping, which took me a couple days, it felt pretty natural. I actually started trying to swipe up on other phones, which shows you how weird, how much I got used to that. The one that took me the longest was multitasking because I started off thinking you had to swipe up, then wait, and then the cards show up. But that always felt so slow. But what you really have to do to get this to work is you swipe up and over, and that gets you to the cards way faster. So that's a pro tip for anyone who is still swiping up halfway and waiting for the cards to show up like I was. You're welcome. And for those with small hands or who just really liked reachability on the bigger iPhone, you technically still have it here. It's buried in the accessibility settings, but you can do the little swipe down on the bottom of the screen to bring the top corners within reach, and that makes getting the top gestures easier with one hand. I leave that on, it's pretty useful sometimes. Now, of course, the other big change that comes with ditching the home button on iPhone 10 is you also just ditched that fingerprint reader, which means, as you may have heard, they needed to replace that with Face ID. Facial recognition. Face ID on the iPhone works really well most of the time. It's not perfect, and I think Touch ID was closer to perfect as far as fail rate goes, but it's still impressively good here. I talked about how Touch ID is like the gold standard for quickly and securely getting into your phone in the previous video. I'll link that below the like button, of course. And I still believe that. Touch ID is definitely still faster, but Face ID can get better with software updates, and with time, as millions of people begin to use it, I think that'll happen. And it still also has some physical limitations that you can become aware of and avoid, just like Touch ID had some physical limitations that you could become aware of, like when your finger's wet or it doesn't quite work because of stuff on your hands, or if you have a glove on, stuff like that. You just know Touch ID is not going to work, so you put in the passcode. Face ID has some physical limitations too. It works by bouncing thousands of little infrared dots off your face and back into the sensor and creating a map of your eyes, nose, and mouth. It doesn't actually use the front-facing camera, and it can learn a changing face over time. It still recognizes you when you get a haircut or shave a beard or put makeup on. None of this stuff has a huge effect on the dot map it made of your face. It also won't be tricked by a picture of you because that doesn't have the depth of your face. And I can also work through some pairs of sunglasses, again, the ones where the infrared light can get through. But Face ID has been known to fail when you're backlit or when there's like a ton of extra infrared light coming in, basically from the sun. It's like how a dim flashlight doesn't work when it's really bright out. Same thing, Face ID is gonna get blinded by all that extra infrared light. Just gotta type in your passcode. But those times for me were few and far between. If Touch ID's success rate was 99%, to me it felt like Face ID's success rate was like 95%. Now that can add up when you unlock your phone hundreds of times a day, but again, this can get better as it gets used more. There's even some settings as well where you can turn attention on, so it won't unlock if you're just holding the phone up to your face. Not only that, but you have to be looking at your phone. Then it'll unlock and show all your notification data. Works pretty well for me, just please don't do this while driving. And even if Face ID is this workaround to not getting the fingerprint reader underneath the glass in time for this phone, I still think that at its best, facial recognition on a phone is closer to secure, seamless authentication than a separate fingerprint reader ever would be. Because with this, you just pick up the phone and it works. You use it, you log in, you pay for stuff, you download apps, etc. But if someone else picks up your phone, it won't work. It's that simple. And then there is Animoji, possibly, maybe the most fun feature of iPhone 10. But you know what's hilarious? These moving facial tracking Animoji are iPhone 10 exclusive. You can't get this on any other iPhone. So if you get one of these, then you know the person that sent it has an iPhone 10. And weirdly enough, if you send this to someone with an Android phone, they just get a video message of this Animoji. But here's the thing, Animoji is just using the front-facing camera. Check this out, Animoji is working and continues to work even when you cover the depth sensors and the extra front-facing sensors, all that stuff. It'll work when you cover everything except for the front-facing camera, which means they totally could have made these available for any other iPhone, but they didn't. Man, Animoji is the classic I have an iPhone and you don't feature. Classic Apple. iPhone 10 also has some slightly new cameras, same exact sensors for both cameras as the iPhone 8 Plus, but slightly better glass. And now both are optically stabilized, so this is gonna get you some meaningfully better performance with the 2x telephoto lens and zoomed in photos and zoomed in videos, things like that, which is good to see because I avoided using it with previous iPhones. And as you'd expect, photos from the iPhone 10 look awesome. I'm especially happy with how much dynamic range we're getting. HDR on previous iPhone cameras used to be a lot less aggressive, and I kept asking over and over for a little more, and now photos really pop. The sky is like always so blue, detail is there, color accuracy is tight. It's not as good as the Pixel 2's camera, just gonna say that right up front, but this is a top 5 smartphone camera, no doubt. If you want a video sample, check out the Tesla wrap video, I'll link it below. That's 5 minutes of 4K video from the sensor right there if you wanna watch that. And despite its tendency to overexpose, I think it might be the best front-facing camera for video for any smartphone. They've also added portrait mode to the front-facing camera for portrait selfies on the 10, but it doesn't work nearly as well. Edges get blurred super hard, almost to a comical amount when you compare it to something like the Pixel 2 or even the back-facing camera. But the thing is, Pixel 2 does all this so much better because of machine learning and software. So in theory, iPhone 10 can keep learning and get this good too, plus it already has better color accuracy, so I'll be on the lookout for that software update. Now you may have noticed we've made it all this way into an iPhone review without talking about any of the specs. Shows how important that is. But iPhone 10 is rocking the A11 Bionic chip and 3 gigs of RAM, and it's awesome. In fact, it's really, really good. I would say this is the most powerful mobile chipset in any smartphone right now. The benchmarks are insane. But this isn't for iOS, this is for all the things that run on top of iOS. The augmented reality apps, the image processing, the super slow motion video, all of that stuff. But iOS is still iOS, as you know. I mean, it obviously feels more modern because of all the swiping and the gestures now, but as far as functionality, it has all the same stuff and features you're used to, has all the same quirks you're used to. Like iOS's notification system is still a mess since they don't group apps together. This is still easily fixable, but there's plenty of other things I wish would be different about iOS too. But it's Apple, they're stubborn, you'll get used to it. And battery life on the iPhone 10 has turned out to be pretty great, close to the iPhone 8 Plus, I would say. Again, iPhone is a champ of standby time, and it always has been, so no problems there. And it handles the biggest iPhone display ever pretty well, thanks to it being an OLED. I haven't had any problems getting to the end of a single day with full use. And if you want to use that screen on time metric, it's usually around 6 hours. So the bottom line, and the question that I get the most often about this phone is, so What do you think? And if you made it this far in the video, you already know what I think, but in case you skipped to this part, this is my favorite iPhone ever by far. I really like it. Is it worth $1,000? Honestly, I don't think people spending the money on this phone will be disappointed. Now, that's not to say this thing is perfect. It clearly still also has its downsides. You know, the fact that it's all glass on the back, more breakable, that's a downside. The notch on the front for a lot of people, that's a downside. No headphone jack, still a downside. But those are all things that I think people who are buying this phone are already used to or were expecting. And for that reason, it's not a deal breaker in 2017. So I'm happy to be carrying this phone. So if you were thinking about going out and getting this phone, go ahead. I think you'll like it too. Until the next one, this has been MKBHD. Thank you for watching. Talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.